Some of you may be aware that Investigative Discovery, a national news channel, conducts criminal case stories. And they contacted my family in 2011 in the summer and published in February of 2012 a broadcast on the Oakland County child killer case. They labeled it The Babysitter if you ever want to check their index to watch that program. And the results of that publication had three factors that I think were important. First was the narrator, Matthew Phelps, indicated to us when he saw the suicide photos in my MSP reports that he had never seen a murder or suicide photograph which was partially blacked out. And that prompted Erica McAvoy to obtain color copies that were not blacked out, and we'll discuss that otherwise in this presentation. Then there were two things that indicated to me that transparency rather than silence is the best way to solve this case. 4 people, adults, called me and said when they saw the picture on Investigative Discovery or the pictures in a newspaper that Christopher Bush had tried to pick them up when they were youngsters. 3 of them were females. And that, I think, covers the subject of whether he did just boys or whether somebody did just girls. Bill Beecham, a retired police officer and FBI agent, and I interviewed one of them, and she told a very interesting story about him trying to pick her up and her running between houses and hiding in garages. She reported it to her school officials and said shortly thereafter she was called into a room with a bunch of guys with suits and ties on. She was still a grade school student, and they even drew the window blinds so nobody could see in, and told her story. And there's an even better story that I received from a lady who saw the Investigative Discovery program. I'm not going to mention her name. I do have it, but I don't want everybody calling her up and verifying it with her. The police are aware of it and have talked to her. She told me that on March 21st, 1977, she was driving down M59, one of our freeways north of Birmingham, and saw Tim in a car. She described it as a gremlin, said his picture had been in the papers. She recognized him immediately, that he looked at her and did not seem discomforted. And when she got to where she was going, she called the Birmingham Police Department and told them about this sighting. Well, that was on March the 21st. Of course, Tim was murdered the next day, and she never had any further follow-up from anybody. Then she happened to see the Investigative Discovery story and the picture of Christopher Bush and said, "That's the guy driving that car that I saw Tim in." To my knowledge, that's the first time any suspect was seen with any of the victims. I turned that information over to the investigating officers, and they didn't seem to be overly thrilled about it, which was a big surprise to me. This lady was upset that nobody wanted to listen to her. She took this down to John Walsh, who did America's Most Wanted, to see if he'd follow up on it, and I understand other people have contacted Mr. Walsh about my case. She called Bill O'Reilly from the O'Reilly Factor, who's been very active in pedophile activity legislation. Gave him my name. Bill hadn't called me. She even called Colonel Etu, the commanding officer of the Michigan State Police, and wanted to know what was happening. And it was a little embarrassing to her because her son was a Michigan State Police cadet. And he had talked the case over with his superiors at the Michigan State Police, who told him that they were investigating. But she continued to try to get publicity on what she had seen and what she had wanted to report. And then one day when her son went to work, he called her up and said, "Mom, a bunch of higher-ups at the Michigan State Police were at the office when I got to work this morning. They want you to be quiet." I'd like to know why they wanted her to be quiet. And frankly, I told her that my children were more important to me than anything else, and that if her son was going to get into trouble, I would understand why she would not continue any further. My understanding that is that she's not shut up about that, and God bless her. So that's a summary of the people who are critical of investigative discovery and information that comes out of the woodwork when you do that. The same thing happened in the John Walsh case. He adamantly opposed going public with the Freedom of Information Act. Once the Freedom of Information Act was made available to the public, 2 new people came up with testimony that nobody knew anything about. And although the suspect was dead, Mr. Walsh and the police were satisfied that they knew who did the work. And that's one reason that we're going public, because we want anybody who has any knowledge about this case to come to us or the police and tell the story.